Hey, what's up everyone? Morey Croson here, and today we're going to be talking about the main difference between throwing a football and a baseball, and we're going to start the video right now. This is the newest edition of the Performance Lab. Reach your individual goals. You don't want to just talk about straight line speed. We also want to talk about your ability to be quick. We break down your video. Let's make you into the quarterback I know you can become. All right, so the reason I'm going into this is because I just recently made a video talking about the load and going in depth into the load. What I realized, and I actually got a comment, we'll put it here, that there was a whole progression that ended up happening within the load. And I think that John Elway actually had a really big influence on this, because before John Elway came into the NFL, there was not this thing of getting the wrist back, and he's kind of the guy that ended up doing it, where he's like getting that wrist into this position. I think it helped him specifically in being able to not waste time with that ball going back behind the head. And so what we want to be able to understand here is, and what I noticed is there's a lot, and I tried to look it up, it's just hard to find video back then. I probably could have spent more time, to be honest, and probably could have found more information. But when you're throwing a baseball, typically you could just kind of just lower that hand down, right? And then you're just coming right through. Or you also end up just like going and lifting the ball and coming through from there. And I think what ended up happening is then when guys were going to throw a football, is there was a lot of this action going on where you would go and the ball would end up causing different grip of the ball, would end up causing the elbow to drop, or would cause these really long loads, right, where you're bringing that ball all the way down and then coming through. So my guess is people wanted to fix that problem, and I think John Elway was somebody that they really saw that if you go and you load here, right, and you get that wrist back here, it changes up how the athlete ends up going through the whole process. Now, I think what happened with John Elway is he started doing this load when he was a full-grown man, you know, so he had the wrist strength and the stability within really his hand and his grip to be able to really withstand what ends up happening when you go and allow your pinky to come back a ton. And even when he does it, he doesn't do it a ton. He just kind of slightly goes back. And since then, we've seen more and more quarterbacks start to implement this action of coming up with the football. Recently made a video on it, and it goes in depth into why that ends up being an inefficient way of throwing the ball. And I really think what we want to be able to do is get back to having more of a neutral wrist position as we're going back, because what ends up happening when you do this, and the key thing that we talk about when it comes to the ability to throw the football better, is we want to be able to get around the football. We don't want to be wasting our time going back and allowing our wrist to break. You know, so this ends up being a key problem that a lot of guys end up facing. And a good way to be able to understand getting the ball around is, as we're loading, we want to right away get that nose of the football to be facing off to the side. We don't want to end up being stuck with that nose of football back, which is what is taught in like the 90-90 idea, right? But there's nobody that is a top passer, somebody that's able to throw the ball really far, that gets into this position. Everybody that is able to throw the ball far gets around the football right away and is really fast in being able to create that rotation within the lower body. So those end up being the main things, and I talk a lot about the timing within the lower body as well, which is also important. You have to be able to step and then get the hips to be able to start rotating. But when it comes to the upper body and the load, I think a lot of guys are getting very ineffective advice when it comes to what that first action needs to be and how to be able to best get rid of the ball, right? What we want to be able to do is get that elbow going, right? We need to be able to get action through the elbow. We don't want to end up getting too stuck with my hand going back, right, and my wrist breaking. I need to be able to get in a good neutral wrist position, right? So this is neutral with the wrist. I'm not here, I'm not here. Okay, so if you're holding the ball, you should be able to look at your hand and be able to see everything is straight. We don't want to be here when you're holding the ball, right? Or here, okay, or turned out. We want to be able to get in this good neutral position and be able to get the nose of the football facing towards the target. If you get the nose of the football facing towards the target, or turned here, and the wrist isn't neutral, right? The wrist isn't straight, then what that means is that you're doing something incorrectly with your grip. You're not holding the ball the way that you want to be able to hold the ball. Now, again, younger athletes is going to be a little bit different, but even younger athletes, I try to get to the understand, like, we need to get to this position because we need to be able to get around with the football, right? I mean, I almost try to overemphasize getting that nose of football around to help me and being able to create that good stability within the wrist. So again, it's really important to be able to understand what we're trying to do here when it comes to effectively getting rid of the football, and really how to be able to load the football and not create inefficiencies within it. And that's the key difference between throwing the football and throwing a baseball. I mean, when you're playing shortstop and second base or the infield, you have to be able to get the ball out of your hands quickly, and that's important. But even then, the load ends up being different because of the wrist flick. The wrist flick is more up and down. When you're throwing the football, the wrist flick is more side here. So you can't load the ball the same. And for pitchers are able to have a very long load. Quarterbacks need to be able to get the ball out of their hand quickly. So what helps in getting the ball out of the hand quickly is being able to more effectively get around with the wrist, get around with the hand, and be able to do that as fast as possible. We want to load the elbow first and then get that wrist around, get that hand around, have the least amount of wasted motion as possible. I put a big emphasis on getting around, but we could also come up and down as you're doing that, right? We see like Mahomes do that. Josh Allen kind of does that a little bit too. Aaron Rodgers is more just coming straight around. Tom Brady is coming more up and down. So, you know, just to give a couple examples of some guys that are really good at getting to the right wrist position. You got to be able to get to the right wrist position in order to throw the ball well. Everyone knows that the wrist flick is critical. Everyone that has gone to a camp or has seen a top quarterback, especially if you've seen a top quarterback in comparison to, like, you know, 10 or 15 or more other quarterbacks, or even 3 or 4 other quarterbacks. You can go to like a practice and you know, local high school practice or college practice, and you could see a guy that has a good wrist flick, and that's typically the quarterback. That's typically the number one guy, unless there's a few guys that have good wrist flicks. It stands out because it's something that's critical, and it needs to be taught. It needs to be understood for a lot of guys. It's not something that is just natural. And even for the guys that do have a natural wrist flick, it is something that you still want to be able to develop and still want to be able to improve on, so you can do it in a wide variety of different throws and positions. And that's why guys like Mahomes and Josh Allen are able to play at the level that they are, is because they don't only get the wrist flick or the wrist position in a limited amount of throws. They're able to consistently get there, and that's what we're able to teach you within our quarterback program, within our quarterback university membership. We want to be able to really teach you the mechanics and give you a great understanding of what it takes to be able to separate. And I mean, it's February right now, guys. If you're trying to get more exposure, you're trying to get looked at, if you're trying to get to the next level, you gotta be able to take the time to address your mechanics and get better with the specifics of your mechanics, and really, in order to really take your game to the next level. So check that out in the description down below. As always, thanks for watching. If you like the information, click that thumbs up down below. Subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions, comments, or recommendations, you can leave those down below, and we'll talk to you soon.